All right. Hey everyone. Welcome back to my stream. Today we'll be continuing with the Learning React series, and yesterday we covered quite a lot, to be frank, and I also learned quite a lot. So as always, I'm excited for today, and then let's get started. So yesterday we left off, or rather finished, the dynamic rendering part, and I think we have to continue with the from conditional rendering. So yeah, let's start.
A lot of things. I can either just reference props directly and then just reference user.id for everything. And this would work just fine. And you'll see that everything is going to be rendered to the document just fine. We're getting these linting issues because we haven't done prop validation, but this works just fine. Or the other thing that you could do, and I recommend doing this, is actually just destructure the prop itself in the argument signature. So what I can do is instead of just doing props.user for everything, I could actually just destructure it like this. So I'm basically unpacking the user field from the props object in the function's argument signature right over here. Okay. And then what I can do is I can reference user directly like this instead of having to reference props.user. And then it works the same exact way. Okay. Now let's go ahead and just very quickly add the prop validation. Might as well. So now you can see that we're pretty much taking everything that we've learned from the previous sections and passing an individual user IDs type dot string. If I refresh, no errors in the console, no warnings in the console. And if I were to remove email from one of these objects, you'll see that it's going to go ahead and give us a warning because one of our objects in the mock user array did not have an email field defined. Okay, and that's the reason why it's giving us this failed prop type warning. So hopefully this component, an array of having this user details, the time state tutorial, you want to conditions how to consider. Need state for your components. We haven't talked about state just yet, but we will get to that later on in this tutorial, but it's just something to consider. In this section of our React tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to perform conditional rendering. Now, the term itself should give you an idea of what exactly it is. You should already know what conditions are in programming, but essentially, whenever you are rendering elements to the document, you want to oftentimes control what the user sees based on some condition. And that condition can literally be anything. It can be if 1 is equal to 1, if 1 is not equal to 1, it can be if the user is logged in. A common use case in the real world is checking to see if the user is authenticated, and if they are, you may redirect them to their personalized dashboard. If they're not logged in, then you don't want to render to them or give them access to certain pages or components that are supposed to be protected. So in that situation, you would want to render either, let's say, a login form to have them log into their existing account or a registration form to create a new account. So this is a common example of conditional rendering working on the front end side. Now, there's a lot of use cases with conditional rendering. So maybe you want to conditionally render a banner on your marketing website to display a coupon for new users only. Okay, and oftentimes websites will use cookies to check to see if a user has visited the website before or not. So if the user has never been on the website, then they'll check to see if that cookie exists and if it has a value. And if there is no cookie, then that means the user has visited for the first time, or they may have just cleared the browser cookies. In that situation, you would want to conditionally render a special banner that gives them a coupon, let's say 10% off of whatever product it is that you're selling. So that's just another example of using conditional rendering. I'm sure many of you will be able to come up with a bunch of different ideas when it comes to rendering elements to the document based on some condition. So enough talking, let's go ahead and actually take a look at some examples. So inside my main app component, what I'll do, just to start off with a very basic example, I'll go
I think yeah, we'll have to clear this off again. So let's do that.
ahead and display a message conditionally to the user based on their authentication status. So we're going to create a fake variable called is authenticated. I spelled it wrong, authenticated. I'm going to set this to true. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a conditional statement to check the value of is authenticated. And the first way that I'm going to show you is going to be a very easy way where we use an if-else statement. And then the second way that I'll show you, we're going to use a ternary operator, which is actually more common. So what I'll do is I'll use a regular if-else statement. So if, and I'll check my condition. So is authenticated, okay? So if is authenticated, if it's true, then it's going to execute this block of code inside this curly brace. So all we want to do is just return JSX. So again, you should already be familiar with returning JSX in your component. The only difference here is that we are conditionally returning specific JSX based on whatever the value of our variable is authenticated is. So I'm going to go ahead and return a div, and I'm going to also have an h1 tag inside, and I'll just say welcome user. Okay, if I go to my browser, you'll see that it says welcome user. Now let's say, for example, if I were to change the value of is authenticated from true to false, you'll see that now the browser does not display welcome user. Now it should be obvious because is authenticated is now false. So this block of code does not get executed. So it never reaches this return statement. And we're not returning anything after this check. So that's the reason why it's currently just a blank page. So what I could do is I could actually just add an else block over here. And I could just return another div and I'll just say you are not logged in. I could wrap this in an h1 tag as well. I'll just do a span tag. And now you'll see it says you are not logged in. Now, you don't really need this else case. You can just actually remove that and just straight up return this div right over here, because if is authenticated is false, then this block is not going to be returned, or this line of code is not going to be executed. And then we're just going to just jump to this part and just return this default message if the user is.
Um, Yeah, okay, let's do that then. Right, let's run npm run dev. And let's open up our React app and maybe I have to save it. Okay, there we go. And if what if I'm not authenticated? It should say you're not logged in, and it does. Turn that back to true and go
So you're
back
logged in.
to the
That's
video.
literally it when it comes to conditional rendering. You just have an if condition, and then if you need, let's say, an else block, you can have the else block. If you need else if to check to see if the value is equal to something else, you can add an else if as well. Okay. Now I'm going to show you the more common way to actually write.
If he's gonna use a ternary operator, it's probably gonna look like this, isn't it? We'll just have one return statement. But I mean, wouldn't it be messy since we have JSX? Return this if you're authenticated, else return this. Or maybe it's just that I'm not that much used to JSX yet, so it just feels messy to me. So let's see if this worked, and that did not work. Why? What happened? Try to save it. Oh, sorry. This should. I always mess this up. It should be before, and this should be after. Like I'm asking a question. Are you authenticated? Then return this. Should work. Else return this. Right. Let's go back.
This. So instead of using an actual if-else statement, we're going to use a ternary operator. Okay. Now, ternary operators may be something that you may not be familiar with, especially if you're just new to programming, but you should definitely learn what ternary operators are because you're going to be using them everywhere in literally every single React project. Okay. If you work on an open source React project, you're going to be seeing them everywhere whenever it comes to conditional rendering. So the easiest way to explain what a ternary operator is and how it looks like is just by showing you some documentation. Now, this is what a ternary operator looks like. You can easily get this page by just Googling ternary operator, and it should be like the first or second result on Google. Okay. So basically, a ternary operator is also another conditional operator as well. And it basically takes three operands, okay? So this is what it looks like right over here. Let me zoom in just a little bit. So right over here, we have our ternary operator. And we have three operands. We have the condition, and then we have the two values that will be returned based on the conditional value. So the way that it looks like is you have your condition, and then you have this question mark, okay? On the right-hand side of the question mark, this is where you want to place the values that you want to return based on the condition. So for example, is member is going to be a true or false value. It's a conditional value. So if the conditional
We're gonna
value
skip this since we already know what ternary operator is, and let's just check.
If I go back to
That's the exact same, except yeah, maybe this is the convention. Like you, yeah, I felt that this was weird. Maybe we place the question mark on the same line, and then the GSX goes on a separate line, and we put that in the what is his bracket called? I mean, this is a I don't know. Is some people call it as a curly brace, right? But okay, let's just say curly brace. Oh no, it's curly brackets. I guess brace stands for brackets or short for brackets, and round bracket. Yeah. So this is parent. This is a round brackets. Then you have box brackets or square brackets. Then yes, you have curly brackets. Then we place this here, and then we place this here. This may or may not be the convention, but I do like how this is structured more than, yeah, I like how it's structured this way. To ask a question, if this is true, return this, else return this. Cool. Let's go back. Oh, what happened?
Literally what it looks like as a ternary operator, or in the form of a ternary operator. If I go back to my browser, you'll see that right now it says you are not logged in, and that's because is authenticated is false. So when we go to our ternary operator over here, is authenticated is false. Okay, so it's going to go ahead and return what is on the right hand side of the colon. So now it's going to go ahead, and if I go to the browser, you can see that this is dealt with values. So hopefully this makes sense. Now, so far the examples that I was showing you dealt with values that only had two possible values, either true or false, and that's pretty simple. But sometimes you might want to check the value of a specific variable or property on an object that may have more than two possible values.
Let's just comment this first before we delete it.
Okay, so a good example of this would be, let's say you're building a system where you have a user and they have different statuses. Okay, so the user status can be not verified, which could mean they didn't verify their email or their phone number. And then the other status can be verified, which means that they verify their email or their phone number. And then the other status could be account disabled, which means that the user disabled their account, so they no longer want to be able to access the account unless they re-enable their account again. So in this situation, we have a status that has three possible values. There could be more. There could be 4, 5, or 6, or maybe even 7 different statuses. It's just up to you and your implementation. So what I'll do is I'll declare a variable and I'll call this user status. Okay. And then what I'll do is I'll just set the value currently to not verified. Now I'll just leave a comment up top over here just so we can remember what the values could possibly be of user status. So we'll do not verified, verified, and account disabled. Okay. Now in a situation like this, we'll definitely need an if and else if statement as well. Because before we only did an if and then an else statement. We didn't do else if. So what I'll do here is I'll check to see if the user status is equal to not verified. So if it's equal to not verified, then I will return, and you guessed it, some JSX. So this will be a div, and we'll just simply use a span tag, and I'll just say are not verified. Please verify your email or mobile number. Okay? And then let's go ahead and check see if the user status is verified. Okay, so else if user status equals verified. So if the user status is equal to verified, then we can display to the user, let's say their personalized dashboard. We can display, a confirmation screen saying that, oh, you are now verified. Whatever it is, whatever makes sense to your application, of course. Okay, I'll just display something simple. I'll just say you are verified. Congrats. Click here to access your dashboard. Obviously, we don't have a dashboard built out, so I'm just going to write some text. And then now we need to check for the third status, the third possible value of our user status variable, which is account disabled. Okay, so in this situation, I actually have two options. Okay, since I've already handled not verified and verified, I've already checked to see if the user status is verified or not verified. So if we 100% know that these are the only possible three values, then I can actually just use an else case right over here, and this kind of just acts like a default case, right? Which implies that the status is account disabled. Personally, I don't like doing this because I like to be explicit with checking my values, but if you want to just use an else case, that would work just fine, because at this point we already know that the user status isn't not verified, it isn't verified, and that leaves us with only one other possibility, which is accounts underscore disabled. Now, you might have a situation where if you're building your application, and let's say you don't set a status on the user, you might set it to null or undefined, then you definitely will need to check with an else if case, you need to check the user status if it's equal to account disabled, and then you can have an else case, also known as the default case, which handles when the user status is null. Okay, so I'll actually show you both scenarios. So right over here, in this else case, I know that the value is going to be account disabled if we reach this block, so I'll just go ahead and say your account is disabled. Okay, now let's go back to our browser and let's take a look at all of the possible scenarios. So right now it says you are not verified, and that's because our user status is equal to not verified. If I change the value of this variable to verified, you're going to see now it says you are verified. Congrats. If I go ahead, if I change this,
Right, let's check. So okay, let's change this to verified. Let's change this to what else status do we have? Yeah, I mean if it's your account is disabled, okay. And does verified work? It does. Let's go
I
back.
set this to null. Okay, so since I'm setting user status to null, that means this condition is going to fail. User status equals to not verified. That's obviously false. This else if, this is going to fail as well because user status is not equal to verified. So this is also false. And then what's going to happen is it's going to go to this else block, and then it's going to return this div with the span. And that's why you see over here, your account is disabled. Okay. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily mean that the account is disabled. It could just mean that in the system, you didn't actually explicitly set the status when you may have created the user. So this is obviously not a good way to, handle that situation. So what I'll do is I'll write an else if, and I'll say user status equals account disabled. And then now I'll just go ahead and copy this and paste it over here. And I'll just say your account is disabled. Okay. And if the user doesn't have any status, aka if the user status is null or undefined, I'll just say please contact a system admin. Okay. So now you'll see that it says please contact a system admin. Okay. So now you'll see that it says please contact a system admin because user status is null. If I change it to account disabled, it will now say your account is disabled. So notice
Oh, it's account disabled, not disabled. Let's change this to account disabled. And if this turns to null, oops, yeah, if this turns to null, it says please contact the system admin, which means it works. So
notice how we're not using
let's
a ternary
continue.
operator in this situation. We're using an if else or if else if else statements, right? And in this situation, it's perfectly fine to use these explicit conditional statements because in a with a ternary operator, you're going to need to actually nest a bunch of operands, and it's going to make your code look very ugly. And I just think it isn't really ideal. And especially if you use linters such as ESLint or Prettier, sometimes they might have rule sets where they don't want you to nest ternary operators. So avoid nesting ternary operators. If you have to check multiple values, more than 2, for a condition, definitely use an explicit if else statements. You can also use a switch case as well. And I'll quickly show you how to use a switch case or switch statement.
Wait, let me implement it first. So let me first commit this. So so if I remember memory serves right, it looks something like this. We start off with a switch. Okay, VS Code gives us the what's the word? Yeah, the syntax. So or template code even. So let's see. Switch user status. If it says not verified, then we return this. We break. Is verified. We return. But what do we return? We return this. Do you need a break? Yeah, I don't think you need a break if it's yeah, in like you're already returning it, you don't need to break afterwards. So why is this? Oh yeah, we need a column here. Then what if the account is disabled? In that case, we return this. You know what? I actually like how, yeah, I know in my previous stream I told that I somehow mentioned that I didn't like switch key statements that much because they just repeat break like here and there. But I guess it does make sense in cases where you want to return something, right? Like it's actually good. I don't lie. Anyhow, and what if it's the default statement you ask? Well, if it's none of the above, then we ask the user to contact. Okay, did I copy the? Yeah, I copied the wrong thing. Contact contact the system admin. Okay, that should be enough. Let's get rid of all the if else statements. And if we run this, does this work for verified? It does. Okay, cool. Let's go back.
statement. So what I'll do is I'll use a switch, and I'll go ahead and just comment all this out real quick. Let's use a switch case. So user status will be our condition, and then we need to set up our case. So the first one we'll do is not verified here. Go ahead and copy. And then the default case for switch statement, case not earlier. Okay, and then you'll notice that if I were to change the value of user status each time, it's going to go and disable how it works. In this section, this all.
I have been shouting since 2023 that learn ChatGPT, learn AI tools. Many people followed my advice.
All makes sense. In this section of our React tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to perform event handling on your HTML elements. Event handling is a very important thing that you must learn how to do because majority of the time, whenever you're building out your user interfaces, it is very likely that you will need to handle events. And there are a lot of different events that you can handle for your HTML elements, but I'll cover the most common ones that you will come across, such as handling events for user input.
Okay, I'm gonna just comment this and then we'll return back. Let's call it right. And now let's get rid of this and go back.
In other words, whenever you have a user needing to type data into a form and submitting that to a server, you're going to need to register events for that. So what I'll do is I'll create a new component and I'll call this login form. So we'll set up a very basic form that a user can enter their username and password. And then we'll also create a button that they can click on, and we'll pretend like that button is sending data to a server. Obviously, we don't have a server to send data to, but the idea behind this is to show you how to actually register these event listeners on these HTML elements. So I'm going to call my component loginform.jsx, or the file, and then we're going to go ahead and export a function called login form. And what I'll do is I'll just return a form.
Right, let's create that component real quick.
Okay, and what I'll do here is I'll set up two input fields. I'll set up one, which is going to be for the username, and we want to make sure we associate our input field with a label. So I'm going to give this input field an ID called username, and then for the label, we want to have this HTML4 attribute, and then it's just going to be associated with whatever the ID of this input is, which is username, so we want these to match. And then for the label text, we'll just use username, and this should be it. Let's go ahead and render our login form in our app components. So let's render that, and let's make sure that it is appearing on the screen, and login form in our app components. So let's render that, and let's make sure that it is appearing on the screen, and it is. And when I click on the label itself, you'll see that it focuses on the input field, which means that we've associated this label with the input field correctly. Okay, let's go back to our login form, and let's do the same thing for the password field. Before I do that, though, let me go ahead and add a break tag after label, so that way it is on the next line, this input field. So I'll copy this whole thing, and I'll paste this, and then we'll just change this to password, copy that, change the ID of this second input field to password as well, and then change the text from username to password for the second label. And then you can see when I click on it, it is properly associated with the second input field. Let me also go ahead.
Let's see if a form has been created. It has. Let's go back and create one for the password. Let's go back. Let's add a break tag.
Go ahead and add a break tag over here.
I believe he's using some sort of
And let's see, let me also do one more thing.
styling.
I'll go ahead and set the type of the input to password. So that way when I type in here, you'll see that we have the password hidden. Okay. So hopefully this is pretty straightforward. Again, regular.
Let's add a PR tag between each. I don't think he's using styling, by the way. I just need to zoom in a bit and it would work. That didn't work. Alright, type password. What did I? Oh, I put. Okay, I see what I did there. Let's put that attribute for the input. Wait.
HTML, regular HTML form. So I can type my username and I can type my password. Let's go ahead and set up a button. And we'll just go ahead and give it the text login. And let's also make it on the next line as well. There we go. All right. So now what we want to do.
Okay, let's do that.
Is whenever we are typing into our input fields, we want to be able to detect whenever the user is typing in these input fields, but we also want to grab the data that they are typing. Okay. Now, again, there are a lot of different events that you can handle. So if you just go to this input field, this input element over here, and if you just type on, you can scroll through all of these different events that you can handle. And again, some of these events are pretty self-explanatory. A lot of these events would not make sense to handle on an input field, but the most common one that we would want to handle is the on-change events. Now, this event that you can handle. So if you just go to this input field, this input element over here, and if you just type on, you can scroll through all of these different events that you can handle. And again, some of these events are pretty self-explanatory. A lot of these events would not make sense to handle on an input field, but the most common one that we would want to handle is the on-change events. Now, this event is basically going to
Change on click.
whenever the value of the input field is changed, hence the name on-change. Now, the value that we want to pass to this on-change event, because it expects a value, it's going to be a function that it needs to call. And this is typically known as an event handler. So all it really is just a function, and I can just pass in a regular anonymous function inside just as a regular value for this on-change attribute. And I can just write a console log for now. So every single time the value of the input field is changed, it's going to go ahead and invoke this function. It's going to call this event handler. And you're probably wondering, well, what exactly do we mean by value of the input field? Well, I'll show you. So this callback function, this event handler function actually takes in an argument, and it's known as the event object. Okay. To be more specific, it's actually a change event type. So I can actually console log this E. Typically, you can name it E or events. You can call it whatever you want, but commonly people name it E or events. Okay. And there are a bunch of properties on this event object, and one of them is actually the target. And the target itself references the actual HTML element itself. You'll see in just a second. So what I'll do is I'll go into the browser right now.
Yeah, let's just do that out, code that out real quick.
And I'm just refresh the page. And I'm going to go to the username field because that's the current element that we have our on-change event being registered. Now, whenever I change the value of the input field, and the way you do that is literally just by typing. So if I just type something, you'll see that it logs the actual target, so the input field itself, and you'll see it says value change. And every single time I type something, it's going to say value changed. And I can type literally anything I want. It's going to keep on calling this function, this event handler, whenever the value changes. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Just to be more specific, this onChange event is not necessarily detecting whenever a user is typing. It's just detecting whenever the value of the input field is being changed. And in order to change that is by typing into the input field. So you can think of it as it is kind of like, detecting whenever a user is typing, but I do want to be more specific with what exactly is going on. There are actual events that you can register that specifically are for detecting whenever a user presses a key. So for example, there's an onKey down event, and this event is triggered whenever you actually press a key. So for example, I'll just log E. Let me refresh, and if I type something, I just press a key, you'll see that right over here on line 13, which is where we have our console log. So right now the onKey down is being triggered, and it's calling this function. And keep in mind that you can have as many events registered on a single element. So you can have literally every single event possible being registered on an element. So right now you can see that the onKey down event is being triggered. And there's actually this property that you can see called key. And this key actually tells you what the actual key was pressed. So if I do e.key, let me refresh. So if I type A, you'll see that it logs whatever the value of e.key is, which is A. If I type B, you're going to see this B. C, you're going to see it logs C. And notice how if I hold shift, it literally logs shift. And then if I do shift A, you'll see that it logs shift A. Okay, now I'll go ahead and actually just remove the onKey down event handler just so I'm not confusing you all. Okay, so going back to our onChange event, the important field that we want to reference is actually the value of the input field. So in order to actually get the value of the input field, in other words, whatever the user is typing, we want to reference the value property on the event.target property itself. So e.target is an actual object, and it has this value property itself. Okay, and again, if you've worked with client-sided JavaScript and just plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, this target element is literally an HTML element instance. To be more specific, an HTML input element instance. Okay, so you can see that when I reference target, there are a bunch of different properties that you might be familiar with. Okay, you can scroll through all of it. So for example, if you wanted to see all of the possible classes that are associated with this input field to give it certain styles, you can reference e.target class list. And that will give you a list or an array of all of the classes that are on this input element. Okay, but we want to reference value. And now what I'll do is let me refresh. So if I type my username, let's just say Anson, you'll see that each time I type, it logs 5 times, but you can see that we have Anson at the 5th time it was logged. Okay, so this tells me that this is what my username is, because we actually want to get whatever the user last typed, okay, whatever the last value is. So it's kind of like it incrementally builds up the username. So it goes from A to AN to ANS to ANSO and then ANSON. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So again, if I keep typing, let's just say Anson, the developer, the moment I stop, this is going to be the last value that was typed into this username field. And if I just went ahead and just deleted the whole thing, you'll see that the value of the username field is empty. And I can actually just copy and paste stuff in here directly, and you'll see that it just goes ahead and gives us Anson, the developer, as the value itself without having this whole thing being logged. Okay, so this is why I said earlier that onChange event is not necessarily detecting whenever a user is typing. It's just detecting whenever the input field is being changed. And again, that can happen either by typing, either by pasting a value, or if you have, let's say, an image upload system, and you can also just drag and drop stuff into the input field, which is something else that we'll talk about possibly in another tutorial. But hopefully this makes sense. Okay, so let's go ahead and add the onChange event listener to our password field, and it's the same way that we do it for the username field. So we'll go down to our password field. So this input field right over here, we'll add the onChange events, add a callback function, aka the event handler. Whoops. And remember, the event handler takes one argument, the event object, and I'll just console log, and I'll use a template string so that way I can have a formatted display, so password, and e.target.value. And I'll do the same thing for username, so that way we have a more formatted.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that real quick. Let's bring up a template retrieval. Oh, okay. I thought so. We need to change this. It's not for the table. tag, it's for the input tag that we want to have this event handler. So did I put no, I need to copy this and paste it in here.
Text. So
So let's go back and okay, and what about okay? All right, that's working.
e.target.value. Okay, this is a template string right over here. So now what I'll do is I'll refresh and I'll just type Anson the dev, and for my password, we'll just type password. And now you can see that right over here, I typed Anson the dev, so it logged literally, let's see, a total of, I believe, 11 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So it called the onChange event handler 11 times for the username field. Okay, and we didn't do anything else for that input field after. And then we went ahead and typed a total of 8 characters in the password field, so it called the onChange event 8 times. Okay, now if I were to click the login button, what would happen is we would want to submit whatever the latest values for our form fields. So for example, the latest value for the username field is Anson the dev, and the latest value for the password field is just password. So these are the values that we would want to send to the server because that's what the user last inputted. Now there are many ways that you can handle form submission on the front end side. So right now we currently have just a very basic form with 2 input fields, and then we have a button inside our form. Now one thing that I want to show you that you should definitely know is there is a default behavior that the browser will do. Okay, so you can see right over here, if I actually just click on this login button, you'll see that it looks like the browser is refreshing. Okay, you can see over here,
It does.
a refresh icon is going from the refresh icon to the X icon. So it looks like the page is refreshing. So if I were to type something in the username field, if I click login, notice how when I click login, the page refreshes and then the field is all cleared out. So this is the default behavior of the browser. You can actually prevent this, and I'll show you how to do that. But the default behavior of a form, what happens is this. So there are actually 2 attributes. There is this method attribute, and typically you set this to either get or post. It depends on what you're trying to do. Typically, if you're logging in or if you're creating data on the server side, in other words, let's say if you're creating a blog post, you would want this method to be post.
Reports request, yes.
The method that you are using. And then there's this action attribute, which is going to be the path that you're sending the data to. Okay, so this would literally just be something like /API/login. And if I actually go to network tab right now, and we just filter by fetch, you'll see that, whoops. Okay, so ignore this, ignore the network tab. Just look right over here. When I click on the button, you'll see that it says this localhost page can't be found. And you'll notice that the route actually got updated to /API/login. So it tried to actually make a request to this path on the same domain on localhost port 5173/API/login. We don't have that path, so that's the reason why we're getting a 404 error, and that's okay. But I just wanted to show you what happens by default when you click on the login button. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to prevent this default behavior from happening, because actually nowadays, you don't actually want to submit data this way using the method and action attribute, because what happens is the whole page just refreshes and then you might lose some action from happening on the page. We want to do things asynchronously. In other words, we want to just send the data to the server without having to refresh the page entirely, because there might be something going on that we're waiting for to happen on the page that we don't want to necessarily cancel. Okay, so I'm going to remove these 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to handle an event called onSubmit. Okay, and again, this is just a regular event that takes in a callback function. And then it's also going to take in this events object as well. Again, every single event handler will have this event object that you can optionally pass as argument if you need it. But what I want to do is I want to reference this event object, and then there's this method called prevent default. Okay, and I want to show you what happens now if I were to click on the login button. Notice how now when I click on the login button, the page does not refresh anymore. If I type into my form fields and if I click login, you'll see that the page doesn't refresh and our form fields are not cleared out. Okay, I mean, they were being cleared out because the page was refreshing, but you can see that it is not refreshing the page anymore. Okay, let me fix the path real quick. No more, it's not being refreshed anymore. But if I remove this prevent default, you'll see that it is now refreshing. So what this prevent default method does is it literally just prevents the default behavior of the browser. So remember what I said earlier is the browser will have its own default behavior that it will do for events. And there are a bunch of different default behaviors that the browser will resort to. And you can always override this by literally just calling this method, because sometimes you might not want to have the browser's default behavior occurring. You want to handle your own actions for your events. And we'll explore them as we handle different events. Okay, so what I want to do in this event is first I want to prevent the page from reloading, and then what I want to do is I want to get the latest values that were typed into the input field. So to achieve this, what we're going to do first is let me actually go to my input fields, and there was actually, this was something that I should have done earlier. I want to associate the input field with a name. So you typically want to give a unique name for your input fields. So for example, for username, I'm just going to give it the name username, and then for password, I'm going to give it the name password. Okay, so that way the actual form element knows the name of these input fields. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I need to actually get a reference to the form element itself. And we can do that by referencing this event object for the event handler that we used for onSubmit. So if I reference e.target inside this onSubmit event handler function, this would actually get me the HTML form element instance, which is the actual form element itself. Now, what we're going to use the form element for is we're actually going to pass it as a value to a form data class constructor. So form data is actually a class that you can use that will actually allow you to retrieve values from the form element itself. So the way that we can do that is first we'll declare a variable called form data, just like this, and then we'll create an instance of the form data class. So equals new, and then form data, and this is again built into the browser API. And then we'll pass in the HTML form elements, which is going to be e.target. And now what I can do is I'll console log form data, and let's just see what it looks like when we log this form data instance. So if I click login, you'll see that currently it looks like it's an empty object, but I believe it's because it's not properly serialized. But what I can do here is I can actually reference form data, and I can reference get, and then I can pass in the name of the input field that I want to retrieve the value for. So for example, if I wanted to get the data for our username input field, well, I'm just going to pass in username, just like this. Okay, and remember, it needs to match this name value. So for example, remember how earlier I added the name attribute for my input field?
Let's just console.log form data and we'll check for ourselves what's happening. Go back, reload, type something in, and hit login, and we get, well, we should have got something, but apparently we didn't. We look into it. Oh, hey there, checker. Hey there, how are you? What's up? Just doing some React here. Right, so let's see here. Go back and form data.get. Okay, let's see if we can. Oh, we can't access this, can we? Okay. Go here and do form data.get. What's that? Controlled input way of forms, which is nice to know, but it's the old React way, huh? I see. Oh, so I guess a lot has happened in 8 months. Yeah, React 19 uses something else. What do you mean by controlled input? Is this what you're referring to, like getting the input, like input data? Alright. Okay. I guess people are still like adjusting to it, I guess, the new way, whatever it is. Now let's take a look at what it is actually. But let's see if it's working first of all. So if I click login again, yeah, it's working all right. Getting form input in React 19, is it? Oh, 5 days ago, okay. With control input means you have to create a state for each input, use an on change on the input to update its value. Okay. With React 19 we use form data, making the code way cleaner. Isn't this form data? Or if you can give me an example, I'll be able to check it out. Yeah, I don't think we covered no, we are covering states actually right now. Or at least I'm covering states actually. If you can give me an example, maybe I understand.
Fields, and the value of name for the username field is just username. So that is what we need to pass in. So if I refresh, if I click login, you'll see right now it is logging the value of username. If I type Anson, you'll see that when I click the login button, it is logging Anson, which is the value that was retrieved from the form data.get function call. And it's literally just getting that data from the form data object itself. And notice how if I remove this name attribute from the input field, it's just going to return null. So you need the name attribute in order for this to work. Now, obviously, this is only one of many ways that you can use to handle retrieving form data. Later on, when we get to actually managing state, and you'll learn
For that? Oh, yeah, sure. I'll appreciate it. Thanks.
how to bind your input fields to state variables, so you won't actually need to do it this way, okay? But this is one way that you can use to actually get the form data itself, okay? So similarly, if you wanted to get the value for the password input field, well, you would literally just reference form data and then call the .get method. So doing the same exact thing that we did for username, we just do it for password. So form data .get, and then we pass in password, which is the value that we set for the name attribute for the password input field, okay? So just again, if the name value was password123, then the value that you would pass over here is password123, just like that. And now, if I type something for password, you'll see now it's going to log that value on line 8 for password, okay? So let's go ahead and do this. Let me assign this to a variable. So form data.gets username, and then we'll do the same thing for password. Let me just change this back to password.
And let me guess, if we have some sort of API, we just send that over to that, and it does stuff. Maybe it's a new user or not. So let's just get the username and password, or take it out from form data. Let password.
Instead of password123, and then const password equals form data.get password. And now what I'll do is I'll just pretend like I want to submit this to some server, right? So you might make some API call. So for example, there's a built-in fetch API that is part of the browser, and you can use this to submit data to a server. So you can pass in some URL. And again, some of you may not know how to do this quite yet because you haven't worked with backend stuff. But don't worry, we'll get to that later on. But just as a preview, you would pass in a URL to the server. So let's just pretend it's localhost port 3001, and then you would pass in your data, just like this, and then username, then password, something like this. Okay, and then for fetch, you also need to set the method, and typically we want to set it to post for logging in. Okay, so this is what a potential API request could look like, where you attach the username and password in the request body, and then you pass in the method type, which is going to be post. And yeah, and then of course you would just wait for a response from the server, and then you would handle that accordingly. So if the user successfully logs in, you may want to redirect them to their dashboard page. So hopefully all of this stuff makes sense when it comes to registering events for your HTML elements. Now there are other events that you may
Also, as a future node, I'm gonna use const from now on more than let, because for things that I know I'm not gonna reassign, I believe it will come handy in future if I build that habit from now on.
you want to register not on a specific element, but sometimes on the entire page itself that the user is on.
But that, yeah, exactly. I'm worried that in future there might be some bug or the other which I'll spend hours looking into, and the problem would come out to be that I didn't use const, or I should have used const. Oh, it will? Oh. Oh, if I'm reassign, yeah, I understand. Like if I reassign a value, then the console will tell me, I believe is what you're trying to say. So if I do const equals 1, yeah, it will tell, through an array will tell me that, hey, change it to letter.
On. So a good example of this
That's right.
is you want to detect whenever the user is scrolling, or if the browser size or the window size has changed. So in that situation, you may want to actually use the global window object and then use this add event listener method, which some of you may be familiar with this if you have learned how to register events dynamically using plain JavaScript for your HTML elements. So window.add event listener. And then there is this resize event, and then we'll pass in the listener function, just like this. And then I can just literally log e.inner. There should be a screen, I believe screen X, I believe is the property.
So, okay, all right.
Let me zoom out a little bit and open up the browser tools. So if I resize this, you'll see that every single time I change the size of the viewport, it goes ahead and logs this object over here, this window object. Let's see. Actually, I believe it's not E. We want to log window.screen X and then window.screen Y. Okay. And then now let's refresh. And if I resize, you'll see that every single time. I'm sorry, this is actually the position. Inner height and inner width is what I want. Sorry about that. Okay. So notice how every single time I resize the page, the height is obviously the same, but the width is getting smaller and smaller. Okay, you can see the current page size is 682 by 1359, and that is being logged over here. Of course, if I were to change the height, you'll see that that is going to be logged over here, 699 by 509, or the other way around. Okay, so that is how you can detect whenever the size of the page is being changed. So you might want to do this if you want to handle certain dynamic viewports using JavaScript. But a lot of times, whenever you're handling responsive design, you want to do that with CSS. But there might be situations where you need to do that with JavaScript, and that's how you do it using the resize events. Okay. Now, typically, you don't want to do it like this. You'd want to actually wrap this inside a use effect hook. I'm not going to show you that right now because we haven't gone to hooks yet. But later on, when you actually learn about hooks, I'll show you another example on how to properly handle those events with hooks. Okay.
All
I just
right.
want to show you a quick example. Hopefully, this all makes sense, and I'll see you in the next section. In this section of our
Let's
React tutorial,
move
I'm going to
on.
teach you about state. State is literally just a representation of data that can change over time.
Is he changing? No, he's not changing app. So Jason, I want to check that so that we could make a comment.
We use state to represent data that is stored in a component. You can think of state like a variable. It holds your data, but instead, state is actually just an internal object for the component that is managed by React. And React actually gives you the necessary tools to create new state values and manage them. State is necessary because it enables our components to store data that can be used later or updated. Imagine you're creating a card game, let's say blackjack, and you want to keep track of the number of cards dealt in every player's hand. You know that such information will change as the number of cards dealt will increase as the game progresses, and the player's hand will change after each turn. So you would need to track all of this information, and to do this, we would need state. Now, you don't always need state. All the components that we've created so far have no state. I'll show you some examples now of how we can create some stateful components. Now, what I'll do is I'll actually create a form. In the previous example, I actually created a login form with 2 input fields, but I actually didn't use any state at all. We were able to track the username and password using the form data API, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to define some state, and I'm going to show you how to bind the state values or the state variables to our input fields. And this is actually known as data binding, and it's a very important topic to understand the state values or the state variable API. But instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to define some state, and I'm going to show you how to bind the state values or the state variables to our input fields. And this is actually known as data binding, and it's a very important topic to understand, and it's usually what you would want to do to create forms instead of just grabbing it from the form data API. So what I'll do is I'll create a new file inside my components folder, and I'll call this register form. So this will just be a form where we will have the user enter in their new account details. So if they want to...
Okay, let's create a new component. Call it register form.jsx.
Create an account, they'll create it through this form. So let's do this export function, register form, and we're going to return a form. And I'm just going to simply create a couple of input fields. And what I'll do is this. I'll wrap every single input field in a div. I'll also make sure I associate it with a label. So let me give this ID. I'll do let's do username. And we want to make sure we associate this label with the correct input field. So I'm going to pass the ID that I assigned to this input field as the value for HTML4 for this label. Whoops. Okay, and then I'm just going to copy and paste this twice. And then we'll do password. And then I'll just do display name. I'm not going to do a confirm password. You can do whatever you want to. And then I'll just do display name, just like this. Let me go ahead and make sure I render this register form. I'm going to remove the login form render in the app.
So back. He has 3 fields, each is wrapped in a div, and the username, password, and display name. Username, password, and we'll have display name. What else do we need? Of course, let's fill this up. We have username, password, display name.
Let me go ahead and make sure I render this register form. I'm going to remove the login form render in the app component, and I want to render the register form instead, just so we don't confuse everything. I'm going to remove the import, and let's go to our...
Actually, let's create a comment called login form, and then we'll state with login form. Let's call that the commit message.
Our application now. So I have my form displayed in the document. That's great. Now let's go ahead.
Okay, let's go to app.jsx and import the register form. Then we'll call in the register Let's use the shorthand and delete this. Let's go back and there we go. In fact, let's add a break tag between each div. That looks better. We'll also need a button, right? Call that register. Right.
Go
Let's
ahead and
go
define
back.
some state for each one of our form field. So basically what I want to do is I want to create some state variables or some state values that will represent my username, my password, and my display name. So whenever I am typing in the username form field, I want to update the state value for the username, for the password, as well as the display name. This will give me full control of each value, and I can do whatever I want with it. I can send it to an API, I can display it to the user in real time as they are typing, whatever it is. Now, in order for us to create some state, we need to use a function, and that function is called useState. And we can import this function from the React package. So we're just going to import useState like this from React. Okay, so import useState inside the pair of curly braces because it's a named import, and then from React, just like this. Now, one thing that I also want to mention is that useState is also a React hook. React hooks are something that we have not yet talked about, but don't worry, in a separate section of this React tutorial, we will formally introduce to you all React hooks. Remember that React hooks are also just functions, okay? So React hooks.
Okay, let's import useState from React. Import useState. There we go. Let's cut. Oh, okay, what's that? Oh, you send the paste bin. Okay, let's see. Let's copy this. Let's see what's the newer way to do things. So, let's see. Oh, you're using useState, okay. So this is pre-React 19 way, and this is the newer way. Oh, okay. So previously you had to use this useState version. Email set email, password set password, okay. And you're writing, I believe the term is event, right? Event handlers for what happens when you submit the email, what happens when you change the email, what happens when you change the password. Oh, okay. Rather than putting it here, you are writing the event handlers. I believe that's the technical term here, and you're putting it here. That's more neat. I like that. Then you have your email. Okay. On change. And what does useState do? It's not exactly like we're only gonna cover that right here, but basically before you had to use useState, and what about now? What's the React 19 way? Const form. Okay, you have a arrow function in here. Form data, and you just get the email, password, and you log it. And you return. What's the action? Action is login. Which is this. I can see that it reduces the code, but then email, password. Like, where do you get the oh, you get the values from here? Password and email, okay. And then you can do whatever you want with the data in here. Whereas before, No more on change. Yeah, no more on submit. No more value in the inputs. Basically normal. I think React control the inputs. They now use the form control itself. I see. We don't need, what you're saying is that before React 19, they had to do what? They had to do all these event handlers, right? But in the newer version, you just need this, right? And you can just pass in the form data and everything is handled within that. That's what you're saying, right? I believe that's what you're saying. Yeah, I guess I have to use the previous way and then come back and look at your new way. Because what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna um create. I mean, taken this space bin. Oh, actually, this is a temporary link, isn't it? I'm gonna just copy this over and then maybe towards the end I'll understand the change better. It's handled by React itself. Oh, so basically, in the newer version, this isn't required, is what you're saying, right? Ah, yeah, maybe I will. But let's just create. Actually, how do I create this? I guess we'll create a folder called code snippets, and let's just call it. Well, what should I call it? Newer state.jsx. Let's just call it that. And yeah, I think this shouldn't cause any errors. So let's just leave it at that and then come back and look at old versus new form.jsx. Okay, I like that name better, way better than what I put in here. Let's use that. Old versus new form. All right, let's continue with this and then I'll come back to this later and I believe I'll understand it better. So let's go back and
functions are
continue.
So this use state is a function. It's also a React hook, and we
Okay,
want to import this function because just importing itself is not going to do anything. We need to invoke this function in order to do something. So whenever you want to create state, you use the use state hook or the use state function. You call it, and this use state function will always return an array with 2 elements. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and console log use state right now.
It's nice to learn the controlled way though, because React 19 is really recent and you'll see the controlled way a lot. Right. When was React 19? Like what version is this? Would we know? I guess it might be React 18. That's the thing. I don't know exactly how the React versioning system, like versions come out and stuff. React 19 release date. Oh, wait a second. It was oh, it was released quite a while ago. Maybe not quite. I guess it's not quite a while if we're looking at software releases. Oh, December. Wait, I'm confused. And why does this thing say April 25? Oh, okay, I see. This might be kind of the beta version thingy, right? And this would be the, oh no, this is the post version. I mean the when the article was posted, but the stable version was released on what? But it says React 19 is now stable, so yes, in December. Yeah. So yeah, this would newer code would use this, is what you're saying, and I agree. You can handle the pending and other state and use state. Okay, let's look at the all method and then we'll come back.
Before I do anything else. And I want to show you in the document what this looks like. So right now you can see that when I log useState, or the invocation of useState, so I'm calling useState and I'm logging the value that's returned, you can see that it's an array and there are only two elements. The first element is undefined and the second element is a function. Okay, so what the first element is actually going to be the value of your default states. So far we actually didn't pass in anything into this useState function call. So you can actually pass in an initial state. And for example, if I wanted to pass in an empty string, I could. If I wanted to pass in hello world, I could. And then you'll see that when you log it, the array now has the first element is a string, hello world, and the second element is a function. Okay, so you can also pass in a numeric value. So you can pass in 1, and then you'll see that it logs 1. You can pass in a boolean, and it will log true. You can pass in an object.
Okay, but what is it used for?
And then it'll log
what is
object over
useState
here.
used for?
So I just want to show you how this works. You can pass in literally anything you want. In our example, we obviously want to make sure we're passing an empty string or just a string in general because we're working with text in our form fields. So it makes sense for us to have a empty string as a default value. Otherwise, it will just be undefined by default. Okay. Now, the other thing that I want to mention is this function. So before I mention that function, let me go ahead and show you the proper syntax of how to actually create states. So you do call this useState function, and remember that it returns an array. Now, you can actually reference that array in many different ways. So for example, I can just assign the return value of useState to a regular variable just like this, okay? And if I wanted to, I can just reference each element by referencing the index, so result at subscript 0 and result at subscript 1, okay? Now, obviously, this is not the correct approach. I mean, you can do this. It's not wrong, but I'm going to show you the right way to do this, okay? Because I know some people might think about, oh, can I just access like this? Yes, you can, but you shouldn't.
I guess there is no right way in anything. It would be more the better way to do it, even though better is subjective. The save and update the value. Oh, okay. You're saying what useState is used for. useState makes React reactive. Okay. If that value changes using set state, it re-renders the components updated. Also, there's useState and then there's set state. And when we set some state, it will re-render the component. It's a core of React. Okay, I guess it's gonna be pretty important. Then let me look into it. I mean, continue with the video and then. But I think I get what you're saying. You also have set state, which I believe he'll cover somewhere, and then
So remember that the
that's another dumb hook which which is obviously covered here, but I have to know what it's about. I guess it's some sort of event thingy. Anyway, that's my guess. Guess we'll find out.
First value in the array that is returned from useState will always be your state value. Okay, by default, it'll be whatever you pass in to useState as an argument. And then the second element is going to be your function. This function is a very special function. It's called a dispatch function. Some people call it a setter function or an updater function. All correct terms, but its responsibility is to update your state variable.
There are tons of hooks out there. Out of them, useState is the one you have to understand. Gotcha. It's pretty important, huh?
Variable. Okay. Remember how earlier I said React gives you the necessary tools to manage your state, and that entails creating your state, updating your state, etc., etc.
I guess if we're comparing it to math in a way, it's like the addition and subtract. Like it's a foundation of React.
How we can manage our state. So what I want to do is I want to use array destructuring. And the way that it looks like is this. I'm going to go ahead and have my const keyword, and then after const, I'm going to have my square bracket. And then inside the square bracket, I'm basically unpacking the elements from the array, and then I'm giving it a name at the same time. So it looks like this. I'm going to call the first element username, and then the second element is my function, and I'm going to call it set username, just like this. Okay? If you haven't worked with array destructuring before, this might look a little bit weird. But all you need to know is that, remember, useState returns an array, and all I'm doing is I am just taking the values from each index, each position of that array, and I am giving it a name. So for example, the first value is going to be username, and I'm calling that value username. The second value is my function, my updater function, and I'm giving it a name called set username. Okay? You typically want to call your function, your updater function, set, and then the name of your state variable. Okay, so username, and then the function is going to be called set username. Okay? We're going to do the same thing for password and display name. So go ahead and do the same thing for the next.
Okay, let's do that first before we move on. So it comes before It comes in the logic part, doesn't it? So, const. Well, what did he name the variable? Oh, I mean, two variables actually. Username, set username. So I guess we'll have password and set password. And I'm gonna guess here, but I believe what's gonna happen is that the password will be the value of password, and for password it makes sense for that to be set to an empty string, and the set password would be the function you wanna invoke when you wanna update your password, maybe. And these two work hand in hand. It's a guess, but I guess it's a educated guess. Oh, alright. Not a guess anymore. That is what I supposed it was. Please, I need to how to speak better, I guess. Not only password, but inputs in general. Yeah, exactly.
X2. So we're going to do const password.
I guess we have to do password to. Wait. I guess we didn't do username. We did password directly. Can be password input, name input, set of value you get from any API. It can be anything. Yeah, I gotcha. So let's do the same for username. To state, and then we have an empty string. There we go.
Setter function, or my updater function, is going to be called set password. And then I'm going to call the useState variable, or I'm sorry, useState function. And I'm going to pass it a default value of an empty string. I'll do the same thing for display name, and I'll call the state variable display name, and then the setter function will be called set display name, just like this.
Let's do the same for our display name. I mean, display picture makes sense, but I don't know. I haven't seen the word display name being used that often. Display name. Set display name. That too, it makes sense for it to be empty string, at least the initial value.
So right now I have created a total of 3 state variables, and each state variable has its own updater function. Okay, for the rest of this video, I'm going to call this function a dispatcher function, okay, because that's the formal term.
For that, kind of weird to use a state to display name. A simple function would have worked fine, but for learning purposes, nice. Yeah. No, I guess it's a form, isn't it? Maybe yeah, I'm not sure. We have to see.
Because if you hover over this, it actually says that the type is a dispatch function. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take each state variable and I'm going to bind it to my input fields. And the way that we can do that is like this. So remember that the input field actually has an attribute called value. So what I can do is I can say, okay, well, I want to associate the value of the input field with,
let me guess, with username. I have this with password. I have this with
the
display
value
name
of my states. So for username, I'm going to associate username. I'm going to
All right, my guess was right. So let's put it in for the others.
associate the username input field with the username states, just like this. I'm going to do the same thing for the password. So
I guess adding a space is
just like that, and then
some sort of
display
convention,
name, we're going to do the same thing.
like
Right
after
now, if I go to my
the
form,
before the
right now,
in
I'm
bracket.
typing right now, and
And
you'll notice
then
that nothing is actually
slash.
appearing in the text box. I can't see what I'm typing. Okay, and you'll also notice that we have a warning, and it's saying that you provided a value to a format form with the username states, just like this. I'm going to do the same thing for the password. So value equals password, just like that, and then display name, we're going to do the same thing. Now, right now, if I go to my form, if I try to type right now, I'm typing right now, and you'll notice that nothing is actually appearing in the text box. I can't see what I'm typing. Okay, and you'll also notice that we have a warning, and it's
Okay, let's take a look at that warning real quick. You provide a value to a form field without on change handler. This will render a read-only field. The field should be mutable. Use default value, otherwise set either on change or read only. Okay, alright. What's that? Const full name equals username. Display it in the component like p. Full name would have worked fine. Not even need a function. Const full name is we take the username. We don't provide the on change function. The input isn't controlled. Or in other words, we need on change. React is warning you. Okay.
It's saying that you provided a value to a form field without an on-change handler. So the reason why we cannot see what we're typing is because we also need to make sure that since we are binding our state variables to an input field, we need to make sure that as we are typing, we are using an on-change event handler to update the state. Otherwise, it's never going to update at all. Okay, so
Okay, that makes sense. We need an on change so that on change function so that React knows, hey, this is what you need to do when something happens, some on change event happens. But since we're not providing it, I guess nothing happens. React doesn't know what to do here. And what was your previous message? Const full name equals username, then displayed on the component like would have worked fine, not even need a function. Oh, you're saying for display name, right?
So I'm going to go through each input field and I'm going to use the on-change handler.
Yeah, just
And
the
remember that in the
user.
previous section,
Oh,
we
you're
used
saying
for
just the username would have
and we did use
been
the on-change
fine
handler.
for the
Remember that
display
whenever
name.
you type or whenever you copy and paste something into that input field, basically whenever the value of the input field changes, this event is triggered. So what I can do is I can pass a callback function, and that callback function takes in one argument, which has the event object. Okay, and remember that event object has the target object, which has the value, and this value is basically going to have what you type or paste into the input field. So what I want to do is I want to actually update the state value of username whenever the value of the input field changes. So remember what I said in
What's that? Every time the user press a key in the input, we want to update it. And display it through the value of the input. Every time the user presses a key in the input, like in the we want to update it, then display it through the value of the input. This is what we call controlled input. So the value, what you're saying is that controlled input means we update the value like using this function, and that updates the actual value, and that displays it into the what's the word, in the UI. Yeah, gotcha. Oh, all right. Okay. Okay. Cool. Let's move on.
in order to update your state value, you need to use your dispatcher function. In our case, we have our set username function. So we're going to call that. Okay, and then we're going to set the new username value with whatever the e.target.value is. Okay, so in other words, whatever it is that I am typing or pasting into the input field is going to be passed as an argument to the set username dispatch function. And this will basically perform an update to the username state variable. Okay, so now you'll notice that if I actually begin typing, you'll see that now I can
Oh, okay. Let's just do that if we for all three values. So let's write an on change and have our arrow functions here. And we call set username. I guess we can just copy this and use the same for password, and display name, obviously change the method to set password and set display name. Is there anything else required?
actually type into the username box. Okay, but obviously
Okay, but at least we are getting the input right now. So
you don't really visually see anything that's going on. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to go ahead and render this username state variable to the document just so you can see it changing in real time as I am typing. So what I'll do is right down below, I'll just go ahead and create a div and I'll just say this username, and then I'll evaluate the username like this. So now watch this. As I am typing, you'll see that each time I am
Yeah, because the value is the one which is actually changing and it gets put in the input.
updating the
That makes
state
sense.
of
I
my
don't think we
username
need to
variable, it
test
actually
that.
is reflective on the document itself, and that's because I am updating the state by calling the set username function. Okay. Now, of course, if I remove this onChange event handler and if I refresh, you'll notice that as I'm typing, nothing is happening. Nothing is being displayed to the document because we're not updating the username state at all. Okay. Hopefully, this makes sense. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the password field and the display name field. So again, this is how you're always going to want to create your forms in React. Okay. We're going to have our onChange handler, and basically we're going to pass in that callback function of this just like that. So now what I'll do down over here is let me just go ahead and okay, so let's evaluate registered an onChange event handler to each something for display name. You can see that it is being updated every single time I change the value of this form example differ from our login form example, right? Because in our login form example, we had no state at all, but we were still able to access the username and the password via the form data API. Now, the major difference here is that in our login form, we don't have any state, and we're getting the information from the form data API. And you'll notice that the only way that we're able to grab this data is whenever we actually trigger the onSubmit function, or I'm sorry, whenever the onSubmit event is being triggered, and then it calls this callback function over here, and then we create an instance of form data, and we pass in the target, which is going to be the form element itself, and that's how we can grab the username and password. Now, here's the thing though, right? I could actually move this form data instance up a layer, so I can actually move this up top over here, okay? But if I move this up top over here, so before the return, I don't have access to the actual form element itself, okay? So I can't just grab the information like that. So the only
Yeah, so in the previous method, we had to, like, there was not a way of us getting the actual data without us submitting the form, whereas with the use of use state function, we can, or use state method, we can get the value as such without the need for the user to go ahead and press the form each and every time.
The only way for me to get the username and the password is by clicking on the submit button. And sometimes we don't want to do that because clicking on the submit button means that you are going to submit the data to the API, but perhaps you're not ready to send that data to the server just yet. You want to perform some kind of validation in real time to give the user feedback so they can make changes to what it is that they entered in the input field. Okay. In this login form example, there's no way for us to access the data via state. The only way that we can do it is from the actual form element itself. Okay. And this is not necessarily good. In this register form example, I can literally grab the username field whenever I want. Okay. So for example, you can see that, like I said, we binded the username variable to this.
You know what? I'm gonna go back to the pastebin example and see if I can understand it now. Maybe not. We might need to come back to it again, but let's just see. Actually, I have it in here, right? Let's take a look. So, in the old way, or rather the way that I'm using now, okay, this makes sense now. Basically, you have a form which accepts email and password, and you're using email, set email, password, set password. Okay, cool. Then you have a couple of event handlers for changing the password, changing the email, submitting the form. So you have that put in here. Then what are you returning? You're returning the and you use for the onChange like function or onChange event, you're using handle. Oh wait, where are you using set email? Oh, okay. You're using this, which in return triggers set email. Okay, that makes sense. I use an arrow function. You've defined the handler outside. Okay. Okay, and you do all of this, and you require all this code for the form to work. Whereas in the newer way, how does the newer way work? You define a variable or a arrow function, and that defines something. It's a login, okay, and that takes in form data. All right, and you return. Okay, so does the new way have us put the thing inside login? And is that how the new way works? Like you just define form data within this and you can access it here. Like you don't need to use state. Is that how it works? I mean, I understood the old way now, like the thing you've written, but Yeah, I'm guessing that's what you meant for the new way. Anyhow, let's go back. Oh no, what was that? As you can see in the old way, we have to use the on. Okay, let's go back to this. On submit on the form. Okay, but on the new way, we use action. Yeah, we use this. Where is it? We use this. Um, but on the new way, we use action instead to make the form control itself. In the old way, we have to use line 23. Okay, we have to use on submit. Okay, whereas in the new way, we use action and we're able to get all the details. And we don't need to define what should happen when yeah, we don't need to define all these event handlers, right? Is that correct? Yes, I have understood it in a way, but I think I'll only really understand it when I implement it later. But yeah, it is making sort of sense now. And you export the form as such. Oh, I guess this is the component, right? Yeah. Okay, let's go back.
Input field, and every single time the value changes, we are calling the set username.
Action exists natively in HTML opposed to on submit. That makes action is something that is there in HTML by default as opposed to on submit. That makes React control the form inputs. Okay. Huh. But my question is, don't you need to use like here we have used on change event handler, right? And you return the handler here and you're using setting meal. Basically in the new method you don't need to do any of that. Is that what I'm saying? Like we can just pass in the thing to action and it handles, like we don't need to use state anymore.
Function, which updates the value of username. So whenever this field is updated, I can always rely on React to update.
I guess I understand more as we, go through the
in the login form example, we can't
first video, whatever you want to call it.
So this allows me to do a lot of different things. Like for example, I'll show you an example, right? Let's go ahead and create a
Oh, okay. On submit and on change are the way React, the library, controls the input. The use of action, we do not need to control the inputs anymore. Oh, okay. It's two different ways. So, okay, I see. So in the first method, it's like you're using React, like React controls everything. Whereas in the second method, it's HTML, like controlling the thing, like controlling the inputs and stuff. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
button.
Cool.
And let's call this sign up.
Let's move on.
Let's say, for example, I only want this sign up button to be enabled if all three form fields are filled out. Okay, how do we do that? Well, remember, now that we have
So what's
to be
the
if all three form fields are filled out. Okay, how do we do that? For example, I only want this sign up button to be enabled if all three form fields are filled out.
Okay. Ishara.
Okay, how do we do that? Well, remember, now that we have state, what I can do is I can write some logic. I can write a conditional to check to see if username, password, and display name are all filled out. In other words, they all have a length greater than 1, or they're just all non-empty string. So what I'll do is I'll create a variable, and I'll call this is disabled. So this variable is going to represent whether the button sign up will be disabled or not. Okay, so remember that if at least one of these form fields are not filled out, then we want the button to be disabled. That means the user must fill every single form field in order for the sign up button to be enabled. So what I can do is I can just basically do this. Remember that an empty string is a falsy value. So I can just use a negation operator. So if not username or not password or not display name. So basically if username is a false statement is true, the button, and I'll use the disabled attributes, and then I'll set it to the value of is disabled. Okay.
Oh, I see. And everything gets updated like in real time. So const is disabled. Not username or not password or not display name. And then inside this we have a disabled property which we can set to as disabled. See if that works. So it should be the yeah, it's yeah. Wait. Okay, why isn't that being enabled then? Not username or not password or not display name. I mean, we have all the values filled out, right? False or false or false. This should turn out to be false, right? Because every value turns out to be true. What am I doing wrong here?
So now what I'll do is I'll go back to the document, and you'll see now the sign up button is disabled. But notice how if I type one thing into username, if I type one thing into password, but if I leave display name alone, sign up is still disabled. But the moment I type something to display name,
I think we have a bug at our hands. So let's see how we can fix this. Okay. What would I be doing wrong here? We are calling set display name, set password, set username. Okay, you know what? For debugging purposes, I guess let me create those three values to see if it's, I guess it's actually being updated, isn't it? What could be the reason? Username, pass. I guess, am I saving this correctly? Okay, let's just console.log all the three values too. And then we'll console.log this. See, maybe I need to hard refresh this. Oh, okay. Why isn't this updating? You should clog them with the yeah, I did didn't I? Yeah, I did. It's I've put the answer, but look at this. The value is, it's not being updated here. Everything is either undefined or an empty string. On change, should I do something with the oh, okay. I need to set the oh, I mean inside this, right? Yeah, exactly. Doesn't make much of a set if I don't set the value. So let's do that. So it should work now if I go back, and if I guess I have to reload. There we go. And if this turns out to be an empty field, it goes back into the disabled zone again.
I'll
Yep,
go back to the
nice
document,
indeed.
you'll see now the sign up button is disabled. So if I type one thing
Yeah.
to username,
Anyway, we fixed
if I
it.
type
Let's
one thing
move
into
on.
password, but if I leave display name alone, sign up is still disabled. But the moment I type something to display name, you can see that in real time, the sign up button is now enabled. If I delete something from the password field, like if I clear the entire password field, okay, so what happens is I remove the letter A from the password field, making that password field empty, right? And since I updated the value of the password field, set password was called, okay, the password state variable is now empty again, which updates this conditional statement over here, okay? Since password is empty, so remember password is a function to updating and then the dispatch function will be called delete every
Let's
state
come
variable
here.
update will update the object and the specific field that we need to update. So what I'll do is I'm going to delete everything over here, and I'll create a state variable. I'm going to call it form fields, and then the dispatch function will be called set form fields. We'll call use state. This time we're going to pass an object, okay? We're going to set the object to have our username field, which will be an empty string. So this is going to be equivalent to having those three state variables just in the form of one single object. So we'll have password,
All
which
right.
value will be an empty string. And
Yeah,
then
because we can pass anything that we want inside use state, can't we? It doesn't necessarily have to be a string or a integer. It can be anything.
same thing. we'll go ahead and update all the references to username. Instead of username, it's going to be form fields, not username, because remember, form fields is now an object, and
Oh, I see. Rather than having multiple, yeah, and making the code ugly in a way, we just have one field called what's that? Form fields, and then we have set form field. Yeah, exactly. So let's have set form fields. I guess we'll have username. Will be an empty string. Then we'll have password, which would be an empty string, or at least set to an empty string initially, and then we'll have display name. Yes, you don't need to change anything else really. You just have to destructure the array, right? Like we can just do I believe this is how you destructure it, isn't it? Like you have username, password, and display name equals, probably doing this wrong. Probably. Yeah, it throws out an error. Declaration of statement X. 1 second, check let me just check this. We'll fix it. I guess we'll just stick to the normal way. But that now the most important thing to understand is that you never update the actual state. You have to create a copy of the state, then update it. Huh. I'm gonna guess what the reason for that would be. So we never update the actual state, like we create a copy and update it. It's internal to React. Okay, I guess it's not something I can guess. Okay, we'll see. I guess for the timing, let's just go back and yeah, let's just change this. Oh, we need to update form fields everywhere, huh? Can lead to weird behavior. Okay.
and we can access the username
We'll see.
on form fields. Same thing with the password. So form fields.password. Form fields is now an object. Form field, just comment out the button. It's not really important right now. Okay, so now we have our initial value data. I'm going to temporarily just comment out the button. It's not really important right now. Okay.
Okay, let's just do as it says. Yes, we can just have two cursors. I mean, we're using VS Code after all. Make it easy for us, and then we'll just comment this out. Oh, not like that, I guess. Or maybe like that. But is this how you comment something in? I guess it is in JSX.
So now we have our initial values set for our username, password, and display name inside this single object. If I were to console log form fields, and let me go ahead and just do this. Let me remove all the original dispatch functions that we were calling, just so we can actually go to our browser tools. So let me refresh the page. You can see right now.
Oh, okay. What happened? Username is not defined at register form. Username, password. Oh, this needs to be set form field. I mean, go back.
And let me go ahead and just do this. Let me remove all the original dispatch functions that we were calling, just so we can actually go to our browser tools. So let me refresh the page. You can see right now, when I render the states, when I render form fields, we have an object that has all three of our values all set to an empty string, and that's perfectly fine. Now, when it comes to updating the state, this time it's done a little bit differently because we're no longer updating a string, we're updating an object. So there's a couple things to keep in mind when you are updating something like an object. When you're updating an object, you need to pay attention to what exactly it is that you want to update. So for example, for my input field for username, I want to make sure that I am updating the username and the username only. I don't want to update the password or the display name whenever I'm typing stuff into the username box.
I guess you
makes sense.
Oh,
so
wait.
be careful when we update the state. So this time in our onChange event handler, we're going to call set form fields. And remember, set form fields is going to update form fields, which is an object. So in order for us to update our object successfully without touching any of the other properties, the way that we want to do it is like this. Instead of passing an object, which you might guess, we might pass an object and then set the username to e.target.value, okay? You might guess that this is the right approach, but it is not. Because right now, by doing it this way, yes, you are updating the username, but what you're doing is you are overriding the entire form fields object.
Okay.
So the way this would look like is you'll have the username updated.
I'll delete password and display name.
Notice how
Okay.
now, username. Username is the only field that exists in the form fields object. Password and display name no longer exist as properties because the object that we passed to set form fields is the entire literal object that we are updating form fields with. Okay, and you can even see that we get a warning that says a component is changing a controlled input to be uncontrolled. Okay, and we no longer have form fields password defined or form fields display name defined. That's why this warning is popping up. So the correct approach to updating an object that you have as a state variable is like this. Inside our dispatch function, we can actually pass in a callback function, and this callback function takes in an argument. And
The
this
current value
so
or
this current
current
state is
state.
literally just
Yeah,
what
or the
the
current
field is.
value.
So you can see I can reference the username, password, and display name, just like a regular object. So look very similar. You want to take all of the values in the form fields object, and the way we're going to create a copy of the current state value is we're going to use the
Oh, okay.
in the form fields object. And the way we're going to create a copy of the current state value is we're going to use the spreader operator on the current state object. So I'm going to go ahead and return a new object inside this callback function over here. So I'm going to use a pair of parentheses that will wrap this pair of curly braces. And this is a shorthand notation for us to return an object. And all I'm going to do is just use the spreader operator on the current state object. Some of you might be wondering, well, couldn't I actually just do it on the form fields object itself? You don't want to do this because form fields itself is the actual state, and you never want to actually modify the state itself. Okay, React has this immutable pattern where you want to never actually directly mutate data. You want to do things in an immutable way. And the other problem with actually using form fields is that you might not actually have the updated state for form fields, because the thing with updating state is that it is not guaranteed to be synchronous. Okay, so you always want to make sure that you use this callback function and reference current state, because this will give you the actual value of the current state itself. So we're going to use the spreader operator on the current.
Okay, all right. So we create a copy. Okay, I guess this is what you should. What's that? Yeah, it is. I mean, it gets repetitive, doesn't it? I guess that's why people got frustrated and came up with a new way. Yeah, it's painful, but I mean, we'll get through it.
Do is this will take all of the.
I mean, yeah, but even if there's a new way, right? I guess you do need to know the old way. Like, I'm not saying you need to know the way which was like developed 10 years ago or something, but if it's pretty recent, you do need to know it. Yeah, exactly. It becomes quite I want to say it becomes messy, yeah. So you don't only have inputs type text, but there is a lot of can be numbers and different logic too, right? I mean,
key value pairs in the current state object and then unpack it into this new object over here that is
I guess that's why in your code snippet you like define it outside rather than inside. Like, it becomes hard to debug too. Like, if you mess up something, silly, it might affect everything else too. Yeah, pretty much.
In between these curly braces. So basically, if there is a current password, if there's a current display name, if there's a current username, it's going to go ahead and place it all inside this new object. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just override the username field, which is the field that we're updating, after we spread the current state object itself. Okay. So then over here, what we're going to do is we're going to reference.
I see. This would have the original username, but this would override that username.
e.target.value, just like this. So what this essentially does is it creates a copy of the current state object, and then you have a copy of all of the key value pairs of current state. And then you override the username field with whatever the e.target.value is. Okay, so this will basically preserve the password field and the value, as well as the display name field and value. But since we are adding this extra line over here, setting the username field explicitly, it's going to override the username field. So in a nutshell, you're basically creating a copy of
exactly objects. Yeah, exactly. It overrides it. I think it's called the spread operator, and then it overrides whatever comes next. If it's the same key, that is. Hey there, what's that? Lorek, right? Hey, how are you? What's up?
Of the current state, but only updating the username field, so that way you preserve the password and the display name field. Hopefully this makes sense. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it for the on change for password, but instead, and you may have guessed this, instead of username, instead of manually setting the username, we're going to manually set the password, because remember when we...
Okay, you know what? Let's just implement this for all the 3 fields. So, basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this in and Okay, we're gonna call set form fields, but we're gonna use a callback function. We're gonna take the current state. Okay, that needs to be an arrow function. And then we're gonna return a copy of the current state, but then we're gonna also update whatever we need to update, that is username followed by the current value of the username. That should work. And we're gonna copy this, and I guess wouldn't this be the exact no, not the exact same code, because the key would change, wouldn't it? I guess you could do something like get the, because this is the HTML element, right? I guess you could, can you get the, can we do this? Let's see. Oh, what's that, Narek? I'm still somewhat new to dev. Can I ask why you chose JS instead of TypeScript? Oh yeah, sure. I mean, there was no reason. I mean, what I want to do basically is learn React in JS first, maybe build a couple of projects, and then go ahead learn TypeScript, and then I wouldn't say repeat the process, but I guess it would pretty much end up not repeating, but implementing stuff with TypeScript, a new language. So that's the reason. Because what I know is that JS is good, but in production systems, TypeScript is used. It's more safer, especially with the weird things JS sometimes does. Like if you add to add like to arrays, it does crazy stuff. But yeah. I hope that answers your question. Any how do we get the ID here? How do we do this? Actually, you know what? Does this work for the timing? Does this give me the HTML, or no, it doesn't? Okay, you know what? We're just gonna copy this so that we render the HTML, and we're gonna somehow make this dynamic, or at least less code. Why isn't that working? We need to debug this. Oh, what's that, Jacob? Having a good JSON mandate to function DS useful when working as a group. Yeah, exactly. Like I guess it might be correct to say as a thumb of rule. Use TS if you wanna actually, like, if it's a large group and stuff, but if it's a personal project, use TS. Cool. So how do we resolve this? Username is not defined at register form. Am I using username somewhere? What's the line thing? I guess let's just refresh this first. It's in line 10. Oh, of course. I'll just comment this out. I guess let's just retry, and line 11. There's some issue. Okay. Of course, I need to comment out both. Okay, there we go. It's coming up right now. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna console.log e, and we're gonna check if we can get the. I know this is just a overkill way of doing this, but I just want to see if it can work, basically. Okay, so how do I get the ID from here? Maybe target.id. Is that something which we can do? Yeah, we can do target.id. So I guess what we can do is we can just have, like, not only for here, but for all the inputs, we could basically have, oops, I guess it won't be need. We'll just copy it over. v.target.id. We'll set that to v.target.value. So yeah, it's giving me some sort of error for some reason. I wonder why. Comma expect. I am giving it a comma, right? Just small project calling an API name. All right, great. So how do we do this? A comma expected. I am giving a comma, aren't I? Let's go back and see.
Update the password.
Do we need a comma afterwards? Wait, what's happening here? Comma expected. Comma expected after what? After this? Oh, okay. I guess we can't use dots for the key value. Maybe that's it. Can we do something like this? Yes, we can. Well, a good exercise would be to create separate function. Like how you did here, right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess that's what I'll be doing like in projects and stuff, but let me actually experience the pain so that I know I need a cure. Anyhow, so let's see if I can just copy the exact same thing for here and here. And let's remove this. Moment of truth. Would you look at that? I believe it's working. I'm gonna. I mean, it should work, right? Otherwise, errors would be there. There you go, guys. I guess we can do this. It makes it easier in a way because we just have to copy things like over. I mean, I guess in this particular scenario, being explicit isn't that bad. So anyway, let's just go back. Display name. We don't want a weird error to pop up. So
When we type stuff into the password field, we want to preserve the username, the display name.
for that, yeah, no, like if you can, let us know if you don't mind sharing, that would be great.
But for the password, we want to update the password with whatever the user currently typed. And the same goes for the display name field as well. Okay, we want to preserve the username, we want to preserve the password, but for display name, we want to make sure we update that display name with whatever we type into the display name field. Okay, so now watch what happens. I'm going to refresh the page, and if I type for the username, you can see right over here that it is updating the form fields object every single time. It's specifically targeting the username field. Okay, and then I'm going to type something in password. I'm going to type hello. Notice how it is updating the password field, and it is preserving the username and the value of username, which is Anson. So let me go ahead and remove this spreader operator on the current state. I'm just going to remove this entirely. And now I want to show you what happens when I update the username. So that works just fine. But when I update the password, you'll see that password is just being updated just fine. But because we are not using the spreader operator on the current state to create a copy of the entire,
It deletes the other fields, doesn't
we're not
it?
preserving the username or the display name, and the object itself is only containing the password field. So we do end up getting the same warning that we got earlier. Okay, so it is very important to make sure that you use the spreader operator on the current state itself to create a copy of it, and then specifically target the field that you want to update. So hope.
Oh, what's that? Create SAS Monday. I mean, I haven't used TypeScript, but I would actually disagree with that because believe to, like you need JS before you can really understand TypeScript. It's like TypeScript is built on top of JS, so unless you know JS, you're You can't. I guess you can try, but it would definitely be better if you start with JS.
Hopefully this makes sense. In this section of our React tutorial, we're going to continue with state, but I'm going to show you.
Anyway, that's my opinion. I'm just new to, not new, but I'm learning React and everything for the first time. So
how we can actually define state for an array, because a lot of times
Hey,
you're going to
Nihal.
want to render lists of
I hope that
lists of an array of
helps.
users, and then you may need to make updates to a specific element in that array and have it reflect on the application itself, on the user's view. So this is a very important concept, so you definitely want to make sure you pay attention to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to view. So this is a very updates to a specific element in that array and have it reflect on the application itself, on the user's view. So this is a very important concept, so you definitely want to make sure you pay attention to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some state. So I'm going to have an array of users. I'm going to call my state variable users, and then the dispatch function will be called set users. And then I'm going to go ahead and call the useState hook, and I'll pass in variable
State with arrays,
on the
okay.
application itself, an array of users, and then
Oh, he's starting over from the beginning, and not the beginning, but deleting app.jsx. So let's go back and do the same. Oh, VS Code did something weird there. What's that, Chekan? When you learn yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. What could be an analogy for that? I guess it would be like trying to learn what multiplication is before you even understand what addition is. So I guess that's a analogy. I mean that's the same for everyone, I guess. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I guess they would like if you I haven't taken a look at any of the TypeScript videos, but I guess they would assume you already know JS and stuff. I mean, pretty much if you wanna get into web development, right, Tarek, I would say learn the foundation like HTML, CSS, JS. I like to call them the holy trinity of web development, and then learn some frameworks, build stuff. At least that's what I'm following now. $30 of JS. That's the thing. I mean, I've heard of it. I think you were the one who mentioned that. Let's look it up. Yeah, this is pretty structured. I mean, it's pretty good. But I guess you can also, learn from YouTube. If you want to follow the courses that I do with in the description, if you're watching from Twitch or what's it, YouTube, so up to you. Checkham states a very important point. It's crucial to not get in what's referred to as tutorial hell. Like you just start a tutorial, you don't complete it, you move to the next part, the cycle goes on, and you need practice. Practice is everything, really.
And you may need to make updates to a specific element in that array and have it reflect on the application itself, on the user's view.
Another thing which I might suggest on my part would be once you sort of know JS, right, along with whatever you're doing, whether it be article like the repo Checkham suggested or tutorials, solve some code work problems or lead code, whatever you want to use. That's one way that I personally like to learn about language too. Like after I sort of know the fundamentals for practice, I go on to what's it, to Code Wars. That's what I like. There's also Lead Code and probably other Hacker Rank. I believe that's another one. But yeah, I hope that helps.
view. So this is a very important concept. So you definitely want to make sure you pay attention to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some state.
Oh
So we're going
wait,
to have-
before we create the state, let's just commit this. What do we call this? What should we name this commit message, guys? I guess we can do believe states are the ones covered here, right? So I guess we can do actually is it it's a hook, right? To get use state hook. Okay, there we go. And let's just commit that. Hit send. Right, and let's go back. Get rid of this. Or not that. Yeah, let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. And let's go back.
have an array of users. I'm going to call my state variable users, and then the dispatch function will be called set users. And then I'm going to go ahead and call the useState hook, and I'll pass in an array. And I'm going to just keep this simple. So I will pass in two objects. Both will be representing users. And one thing that I do want to also mention as well is that I have this user details component. I created this very early on into our tutorial. If you haven't been following along, then you can either just create your own custom user details component, or you can just copy this one. This one is very simple. There isn't any complex logic at all. It is just rendering plain text. Okay, it takes in one single prop. So we're just going to reuse this component just to save some time. Okay, so we're going to make sure that each one of our users have an ID, a username, and an email.
What's that? Oh. Oh, okay, alright. I guess that's a convention, huh? You said there are other hooks. Of course, there are other hooks. I guess would it be right in saying that use state is the most popular hook? And there's what use ref. Ah, okay. Ah, it is. Oh, what's that? Third. Have to check this. Oh, thank you, Narek. Thanks for the follow. I appreciate it. And yeah, let's go back.
Address just to stay consistent with our user details prop. So let's make our users.
I think we already have.
Just to stay consistent
Oops.
with our.
I don't think I deleted. Yeah, there we go. We already have user details. It's as we left it off. Also check them. I believe with obviously with TypeScript we don't need prop types, and it takes care of it for us.
Our user details prop. So let's make sure we have an ID, a username, and then an email address.
Alright, okay. Also with React 9, some hooks got replaced, duplicated. Oh, I guess React 19 was a pretty major update in a way, I guess. And since it's new, I wouldn't assume that people have started making courses or anything with it. But yeah.
And I'll go ahead and copy this object and paste it. So I have two now, and I'll just make sure I change the ID.
That's good to know. I mean, good.
Address.
Good to know. Good to know.
Now let's go ahead and render our users.
Major not one. Yep, thankfully indeed. Was that another question? I know. Yes, now then maybe TS. Yeah, pretty much. If you know HTML, CSS, and JS. Also at I don't know exactly where you're out, like where you're in your like in your programming stage, I guess. Like, do you also know any other language? Because depending on that, you might need to spend quite a lot of time on practicing JS with those problems. But if you already know some other language, then you just need to don't need to spend that much time practicing JS. You can just get started immediately with React. But if you don't know that much, like JS is essentially your first language, then you probably would need to go ahead and practice more JS. as a rule of thumb, right? Like when I learned Python years back, it's been so long, but when I learned it, the first like I practiced quite a lot. I think for 1.5 months or 1 month or something, minimum of 1 month anyway, before I started on a actual module or actual project. Yeah, pretty much.
to the document. And we should know how to do this. This is known as dynamic rendering or rendering lists, which we've covered in previous sections of our React.
You're
tutorial.
welcome.
So we're going to use a pair of curly braces because we're going to be evaluating some JavaScript. We're going to reference our user array, and we're going to call the map function.
I heard the thing again. Let's look at what it is. I need to have some sort of notification system. Someone gave me a follow right now. Do. Oh, Elio Italian. Thank you. Thank you for the follow. I appreciate it. Oh, I refreshed my browser on the other system that I use and I lost all the messages. Did you? Um, yeah. Great. Let's go back.
This function takes in a callback function, also known as a transformation function, and it takes.
So what are we doing right now? We're going to use
a pair of curly braces because we're going to be evaluating something or rendering list our users ID, address, prop. So let's make sure we have an ID, a username, and then an email address. And then I'll go ahead and copy this object and paste it. So I have two now, and I'll just make sure I change the ID.
Then we so why are we doing this?
Let me change the username as well as the email address. Now let's go ahead and render our users to the document. And we should know how to do this. This is known as dynamic rendering or rendering lists, which we've covered in.
Wait a second. I'll do that by myself first before he shows me how to. So let's go to our app.jsx and okay, we're using okay, let's not use useState right now. Let's just oh I see. He's defining the users within that. Like he's using the useState hook to define a list of users, and I believe he's gonna dynamically render them. So let's do that. So we have users, and when we have set user. What's that, Elio? Oh, I am. Are you from Kerala too? Da, 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 da. Yes, there should be separate logic, but hey, let's experience the pain before we find a cure. Okay, so let's call you Stay. Oh, you are? Where are you from? I mean, if you don't mind sharing. Let's see. ID, username, email. Let's just create random users. Oh, you're from Kollam, okay. That's way. What's that? HTML, CSS. There you go. Check them. given and kind of like a short roadmap. So FYI, my main aim with web development is to learn enough web development to create some kind of like AI app. Like if you go to my like underneath my Twitch description, my main aim is to learn or rather go into some sort of an AI field as such, like learn ML and stuff. But I figured that if I want to create projects with ML, like if I want to show them to normal users, people who aren't developers or programmers or whatnot, I need to learn web development. And I already know Python. Like I already know how to build websites with Flask and whatnot, but this is the standard. Like JS is the standard, and might as well learn it. And what about you, Ilio Tilin, which I'm pretty sure is not your real name, but like, what do you do? Are you a developer or are you a student, or if you don't mind sharing that is? Let's just create user here. Also, how did you know I'm from Kerala? Like, or maybe it's there in the in my GitHub, or maybe I mentioned it in my description. Who knows? Oh, that's great. Good to know. I don't think there are many people from. Actually, I haven't checked, but there are many like people, or I should change my what I'm about to say. There are many programming channels, like or established programming channels in Kerala, I guess. I think the one that I know is about that. There's a company of sorts, right? I forgot the name, but yeah. Or maybe there is, and I haven't looked into it. What kind of developer are you? I'm assuming you're a web developer. Hanson. Let's change this to Bob. That's why not. Oh, what's that? Check out. I missed you. I mean, I missed your previous message. Next.js. Yeah, if I'm not wrong, check out. Next.js is kind of like the superset of React, like how TypeScript is the not superscript. Did I say superscript? I meant superset. The superset of like how TypeScript is the superset of JavaScript. Next.js is kind of like the superset of React. I haven't done much research into it. It's just what I've come to know based on some articles or something. What's that front end Mender? I think you shared that link with me before, right? It was like Code Wars, but basically you have to recreate the UI that they give us. Or maybe it was something else. Let me just open that up. It's a framework of React. Oh, it's not a. I guess I need to get my tech vocabulary right in web development. What's this? Yeah, I think this was something you had sent to me too, like when we were looking at HTML and CSS. Code was for front end, I guess. Oh, you're a React dev? Okay, that's cool. Oh, what's that fullstackopen.com? Let's check that out too. I think that's a new one. Huh. What is this about? This is like everything, isn't it? Related to web development as such. Oh, that's cool. It's totally free. It is crazy, isn't it? Like everything, like literally everything is free these days with the internet. Like your phone, in a way, is the most powerful thing that you have with you, right? Like, or internet is the most powerful thing that you have with you. Like, you can learn literally anything that you want. Sure thing, Noractica. Oh, what's that? We have a new chatter. Is it okay to call you guys chatters? They need to take Mongo off that list. Why? What's the problem with MongoDB? Isn't good? Yeah, it's as you said, Shekam, like you said React 19 has these new features which aren't covered here, but I feel you need to know if it's not 10 or 5 years old, there's no harm in knowing it. Like it isn't that old.
Let me change the username.
I agree. I mean, personally, I like NoSQL, you know, databases quite a lot than SQL databases. I know it's like it depends on the application, but generally most applications can just get off by using a NoSQL database. Yeah, I agree with you. Uh, React Doc is better. What is React Doc? Let's check. Oh no, this is documentation related to React, right? If you can send the link or something, that would be great. I would like to know what React Doc is.
As well as the email address. Now let's go ahead and render our users to the document. And we should know how to do this. This is known as dynamic rendering or rendering lists, which we've covered in previous sections of our React tutorial. So we're going to use a pair of curly braces because we're going to be evaluating some JavaScript. We're going to reference our user array, and we're going to call the map function. This function takes in a callback function, also known as a transformation function. And it takes in up to 3 arguments, but we only need the first one. And the first argument is just going to be the actual elements itself that is inside the array that we are currently processing. In other words, we are currently transforming this user object into JSX, something that is renderable. So we're going to go ahead and have our callback function return JSX, which is just going to be our user details component. We need to make sure we import user details. So let's go up over here and import that from the components folder, user details file, just like that.
We created the users and now we're gonna return. Yeah, he's gonna implement it within the JSX itself. But wait, let's just do that real quick. What that chicken? Meta itself, but personal endorsement. Likewise, I mean it's initially I want some like I personally I've seen people learn off from books, which it depends on person to person, but I like videos first, right? Depending on the topic that is, but I like videos first, and if I know about it, if I know about the content, right? Like I have built things within it, then I move to docs if I want to just quickly search things up. But I guess nowadays you like if you really know something, you just ask GPT or something. I guess that's the new thing to add to the list. Not really. I mean, I don't think there's anyone out there who really likes looking into documentation. Just if there was a video equivalent each and every time for every solution, you just go with that. But yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't think learning from docs, like I wouldn't like that either. Learning from docs, emphasis on learning from docs, not checking docs to find solutions to your XYZ issues. Yeah, let's do dynamic rendering here real quick. He's gonna use users.map. Hey, I don't think so. I mean, I think even senior developers they don't. I don't think anyone really learns from documentation. Like it is there and it needs to be there, but it's not unless it's some really new tech which is very unpopular. In which case you're just learning for the sake of learning. You know, you wanna go with docs. Anyhow, so we have user details and we're gonna it's coming to me now. Like we need to pass in. Does this give me what all it accepts? Oh, I guess we can just give it the user, right? Like the entire thing. And this needs to be in curly brackets. Alrighty. This should work. Let's go ahead and check. Or I guess not. What happened here? Why isn't it working? Let's just reload, I guess. Or maybe just close this. Maybe it's not saved. Use state is not defined. Oh, I did not import use state, did I? Let's import that real quick. Import use state from React, and if I save that, failed prop type. The prop user.name is marked. Okay, alright. User.name. Oh, okay. This needs to be name, not username. And if we go ahead, why isn't it working? What could I have done wrong here? Oh, I'm not returning this. That's the reason. There we go. I like it how we like, you know, when something goes wrong and we just, it would be just a keyword or something which is missing. And it would be pretty much a silly bug.
Now let's go ahead and make sure we pass in our props. So the first one that we must pass in is the key. Remember that every single time you are rendering lists of objects or elements, you always need a key associated with it. So in this case, I'm going to use the user ID as the key. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in the user prop, just like that. And for the user props value, it's just literally going to be the object user itself. Okay, and there shouldn't be any issue. I have both of my users state variable. I have a form that allows the admin to, or administrator to a user's state variable. So let's say down the road, you want to add the option for your administrator to create a new user on the spot. So you may have a form that allows the admin to add a new user, and then it will be updated on this view. So you'll now see 3 users instead of 2. Or perhaps you want to update a specific user's username, such as Anson, or maybe you want to update their email address, such as anson@gmail.com. And then you also want to make sure that those changes are saved and reflected onto the document. Or maybe you may want to also just delete the user entirely. So these are all things that I'm going to cover.
What's that? That's why I rarely use the return component syntax. I go straight for how do you go straight for component? I go straight for what's the difference between line one? Oh, is that, can you do this? Is that what you're saying? Does this work? Oh no, it doesn't. Maybe I'm missing something. You go straight for component slash. Don't you still need to return it though? Yeah, maybe if you just maybe provide an example and maybe element component. Okay, we are taking the user here. Oh, okay, I see. Because it's a one liner, we don't. Yeah, I gotcha. We don't need this. This is what you see. This is what you see. Oh, I'm missing a couple of. I guess you don't even need this since it's a single element thingy, right? Oh, okay. Huh. That's great. I mean, I know that this was covered there, but I forgot the syntax. Yeah, that's much easier. Like it's shorter. Shorter, better. Yeah, that's why I like Python. I mean, JS is good too, but you have to agree that Python is shorter than JS. Like when you come from Python, right, like, these curly braces they make, like, if you're coming from a Python background, you don't really like these curly braces. That's a very good point. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like with front end, you have no option. You need to know. I don't. Yeah, I mean, you need to know HTML to be precise, but you need to know JSS. No way around it.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my user details component, and I'm going to go ahead and modify this component just a little bit, just so that way we can suit our example. So what we want to do is we want to give the user, in this case ourselves, the ability to edit each individual user to whatever it is that they want to edit to. Okay, in order for us to do this, we obviously need some kind of text box for us to type stuff, so we need an input field. So this is going to combine all the things that we've learned so far, such as conditional rendering, handling forms, handling events, things like that. Okay, and again, if you haven't been following along with all the previous sections up until now, don't worry, I'll do my best to explain every single thing that's going on as well. So what I'll do is, the first thing that I want to do is I want to...
You know what? I think this is a good point too, because this feels like a good refresher thing to do tomorrow, since he said he'll be doing everything, recovering everything else from before. So I think I'll be ending the stream now. And time flies, doesn't it? We covered almost 2.5, like the stream has reached the 2.5 hour mark, and it really didn't feel like it because, everyone was there, and I really enjoyed the stream today. So thanks a lot, Chekam. I mean, for being here, and thanks to everyone else for coming in and hitting follow, staying up to chat and whatnot. Yeah, have a good day. Chekam, take care. See ya. I'll see you in the next one. All right, take care, guys. Bye.